Welcome to episode 9, Julian. And this is a special episode.
It is.
Because I am sitting next to Julian as we record this edition of American Journey.
On today's episode, we're going to talk about American TV. We're going to talk about Yellowstone National Park. And we're going to continue our education series, part 3, where we'll talk about icons in American schools. Okay, Michael, so you've chosen a subject this week that I know nothing about. Arguably, I know less about American TV than I know about Harry and Meghan, and I really knew very little about that. I don't own a TV. I don't really watch much television. I stream the occasional thing on Amazon Prime or Netflix. But you've chosen American TV I know little about. So why did you choose this subject?
I did so, Julian, not to expose your lack of knowledge of the subject, of course, but the all-pervading influence of American TV on British culture. I thought the purpose of this podcast was to explore the American society through the eyes of two Brits, one living there, one living afar. But I didn't think we could do that without sort of recognising the impact of US TV on British culture.
I would agree that TV is a massive cultural influence, not just on the UK, but the rest of the world. And not only TV, movies as well. You know, since the movies first came out, their impact on culture worldwide is enormous. And actually part of the thing which historically has attracted people to the US. You know, they see the palm trees, they see the beautiful blue skies, and they want to live in, well, at least they want to live in California.
Yes.
So what's different between the TV production for the UK and the US then?
Well, I want to focus on 4 genres because I think each of them in their own way impact on us. But I'm going to start, before I describe the genres, with MTV.
I didn't realise you were such an advocate of MTV, Michael.
Well, I'm not, but I'm going to illustrate how it impacts British culture. And I suspect for the generation who grew up in the 80s and the 90s, it was very significant. And I do so if I refer to my son, who, avid viewer of MTV, and then told me one day he was going to put the trash out. And he was going to the garage.
Right.
So you suddenly realise that this all-pervading influences were starting to influence the way that people were talking. I also have a view, Julian, I don't know what you think, this is sort of slightly left of field, but I truly believe MTV was partly responsible for the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Right.
And what do I mean by that? Was because all of a sudden people were able to see what it was like in America, and no matter how the communists was portraying how ideal life was in East Berlin, sure enough, MTV opened their minds, and there was a wider world out there.
I can buy that. I've read in the past, and I think we can go back pre-MTV, but I've read in the past that the Beatles were very important at an earlier stage in showing people in the old Soviet Union that there was creativity and things which weren't done in the old Soviet Union. And that was an important part. Now, obviously, that wasn't TV and that wasn't America. It was radio and it was Britain. But yeah, I can buy that the portrayal of the West was instrumental in changing minds in the old Soviet Union.
Okay. So let me go on to my 4 genres, right, Julian?
Okay, good.
So we're going to talk about comedies, the talk show, westerns, and crime. And I'm going to start with westerns because, of course, I'm a boy who grew up to The Lone Ranger, Little House on the Prairie.
Right.
And all these gave you a fascinating view of what the Wild West was like. Of course, it wasn't like that at all, but there is no doubt the hero and the villain culture, and a very strong message that the heroes won out, and the baddies were driven out of town as the goodies came in. And I think that shaped a lot of British people's views around how America was, and this values that the good always comes to the top. What do you think on westerns?
Well, they're not my favourite genre.
Yeah.
However, the very best of every genre is worth watching. My father's a big fan of westerns, and some of them are very poor indeed. There's the same story every single week. And who wants to watch that? You could see the good and the bad in simplistic terms, that would be played out in political engagement even today. In a world which is pretty complex, where really, to be honest, most things are shades of grey, and where most arguments have both things against them and things for them, America still has this, in the main, it still attempts to, well, this is good and this is bad. And this is a man with a white hat, this is a man with a black hat. And I guess you could take that back to the Western, which portrayed things in simplistic terms, good and bad, when actually the world is really full of grey.
Yeah, and I was speaking particularly around Westerns that focus on children, because that's what I grew up with. Mm-hmm. But if you look at people like the John Wayne movies,
right.
That sort of hero, all-American hero, comes to save the day. Mm-hmm. And whether we like it or not, I think it's still fairly pervasive in American culture, that they do believe in heroes. And whereas in the UK, we're much more cynical about people in that way. So John Wayne, American heroes, Westerns, that's my number one.
Yeah.
No, number two, I'm going to go with the talk show. There is no doubt that the Americans exported the talk show to the UK.
Right.
So I'm thinking like David Letterman, Saturday Night Live,
mm-hmm.
And that all spawned things like we have with Parkinson and Graham Norton. And indeed, perversely today, we've exported James Corden to the States.
Right.
But that's
not only James Corden, there would be another British, it was a Scottish guy whose name temporarily eludes me, who was one of the late night show hosts, and then the other late night show hosts at the moment, we've got a South African, so it's quite an international group. So they exported it to other countries, and then other countries have returned the favour. And indeed, it may surprise you to learn that Graham Norton has a big following in America. What you can get away with on British chat shows is slightly more than you can get away with on American chat shows. The Graham Norton shows are very regularly shown in the States. Yeah. Same people on them, same Hollywood stars, but somehow, they ply them with alcohol. They get a big group of them together, and suddenly these people are looser and a little bit more forthcoming than they are on the staged talk shows.
Ultimately, all the people going on there are trying to plug a film or a book, and so in a sense, it's very clever advertising. Mm-hmm. But I suspect, I don't know, if you look at British TV or American TV, most nights of the week there will be that type of format, and that came out of America. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Genre number 3. Comedies. Again, I think this is quite interesting, because if I think about things I remember about American comedy, and I'm thinking like Robin Williams, Mork and Mindy, I'm thinking the Fonz, Happy Days, I'm thinking about the Monkees, So this was a different type of humour. Certainly within the UK, we spawned things like not the 9 o'clock news and Monty Python, but we have this sort of wacky American humour that has came over to us, and a big following, and I suspect even Julian today has stood the test of time.
Right.
Stood the test of time.
Well, Friends, for example, I mean, it's really quite old now. It's 25 years old and still incredibly heavily watched. Until it was taken from Netflix, it was the most watched Netflix program. Then Seinfeld and, the whole range of things. On American TV, you go to a motel room or something and scroll through the hundreds of channels, you will find these old comedies on, channel 158 or something, and they'll be showing 333 episodes or whatever it was of I Love Jeannie or whatever. So.
About I Love Lucy, I think, wasn't it?
I Love Lucy. What was that? Yeah, you're right. You're reaching the edge of my knowledge. There was one who've got Genie, wasn't there? When somebody calls up a genie.
Yes, there was.
Larry Hagman. What was that called?
And I'm trying to think what it was called.
Well, anyway.
Samantha or something like that, wasn't it?
Her name was Samantha. Yeah.
But I suppose I'm making the case again around a particular type of humour that the Americans exported to the British, and then we've adopted.
And there's a big difference in humour between the British sitcoms and the American sitcoms. And the big difference is that British sitcoms tend to be written by duos, or maybe on occasions by single writers. I mean, all of the major sitcoms have been written that way. They're written for BBC, which is where most good sitcoms were written for. They get half an hour. The series will typically be 6 episodes long. You'll get 6 episodes in a year. For American comedies, they'll be looking to try and get 25 episodes a year, and there will be a team of 20, 30 people who are writing that sitcom. That's a fundamentally different way of writing humour. I think they both work. And there's something in American television which happens when you get to 100 episodes that you then can syndicate that comedy. And that's why you see on all these local TV stations very old episodes of comedies, because something produced in the 1970s, like Happy Days, will be syndicated and shown really on rotation forever. And so the people on those shows, when it's syndicated, when they get to the 100 episodes, it's a big cash day for them.
Okay. And so we shouldn't leave comedies without also making reference to things like The Simpsons and all those spin-offs.
Right.
Because again, they are still very popular in the UK. You can switch on the TV anytime and there'll always be one of this guy's...
And are they 300 episodes or something by now? Probably something like that. And the people who've done The Simpsons, they and their offspring are going to be cashing in those checks forevermore. Whereas even the great British comedies, often they've got 6 or 12 or 18 episodes total.
Yeah.
Fawlty Towers, 12 episodes.
Yeah, Blackadder, so yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's go on to crime.
And this is a particular favourite genre of yours, isn't it, crime?
Well, not me, but my wife. So if I was to appear on Mastermind, which I wouldn't because I'm not bright enough, but if I did, I'm pretty certain American crime could be one of my specialist subjects.
Right.
I go back to my youth and thinking around the crime shows you used to get, like Perry Mason or Ironside. And again, this theme of the American hero, there was never any miscarriages of justice.
No Black Lives Matter stuff. Yeah.
They always solve the issue. And now we've got, sort of wall-to-wall crime. And I'm going to focus on the four that my wife most avidly, which is, and actually not all crime, Chicago PD, Chicago Medical, Chicago Fire, and occasionally they interlace them. But again, we've got this huge issue.
Well, they have people from one appearing in the other.
Absolutely, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah, they do. And
does people get confused?
Or worse, because you can be watching these, what they call crossover episodes, and then you finish one, and you think, oh, what's going to happen next? And in the next episode, the story's not there because the story's being finished in another part of the program. So something which happens in Chicago PD is then finished in the medical one. Yeah, and of course we're getting them late in the UK, so they're not necessarily all synced. So it's quite frustrating.
Well, that's the problem with syndication. When you watch these old programs which are shown back to back, they don't necessarily show them in order. Yeah. So you see people in one episode, they are heavily pregnant, and the next episode it's before they got pregnant and they got a different hairstyle, and it's confusing to a stupid person.
Or Bobby Ewing in the shower.
Do you think that somehow American crime show affects people's perception of crime in Britain?
That's a very good question. And they're very different to UK crime shows. UK crimes, I would say, are more gritty. I mean, there's a bit like, the violence in American crime shows isn't real. Mm-hmm. So I mean, if I was to contrast Midsummer Murders with Chicago PD,
Dangerous Village.
Dangerous Village. Lots of people die there all the time. but it's sort of
it's actually more dangerous than South Side of Chicago. That village.
Does it impact people's view? No, I don't think it does as such as how they see crime. I don't think it puts people off going to Chicago. This ability of Americans to sort things out quickly, and I mean, if you watch SWAT, which is one of my wife's particular favourites, there's always a baddie, and the guys pulling, and these guys look like a walking army when they go in, but they always get their man, so to speak. And it does come back to this theme I had in the westerns that American crime or westerns have got to have a hero.
Well, I guess if it was a realistic British one, then 90% of the time they wouldn't solve the crime, but everyone would get a crime number. So if it was realistic. Yeah. But British crime appears to me, for the ones I have watched, they appear to me to be about mavericks. Your Morses or what was that one with David Jason in? They're sort of, they are geniuses, but they don't get on with anyone else. They're, they're mavericks. Whereas they're more ensemble pieces, I think, in America, from what I've seen. Is that right?
Well, I'm going to be more controversial. I think they portray the British detective is cerebral. He's thinking it through, whereas in American it's shock and awe. It's armed force. We're going to take this person down. There's not a lot of, and by the way, if we don't find the right person first and foremost and there's collateral damage, that's okay, because at the end of the day, we've got the baddie.
British television is popular in America. I don't know whether you know this.
Yes, I do.
Wherever I go and they hear my accent, and after they realise I'm not a South African, they realise I come from England, they always say how much they love British television. And it's strange what they think of as British television. They love Are You Being Served?, which is on all of the time on American television. They love, of course, Downton Abbey and those type of things, Doc Martin, Midsummer Murders and Foyle's War, and they regard that, most of the people I speak to say that television is far superior than any American television that they can think of. I mean, I'm not sure I agree with that. I think, many of the American television shows are absolutely splendid. They see BBC television in particular, I think Foyle's War might have been ITV, but they see that as the epitome of class and interesting TV.
Okay. And what about The Crown on Netflix? I'm assuming that's got very good ratings in there.
Yes, I think. Well, I mean, I have watched The Crown on Netflix, and it is very good. So I think it merits its ratings. I guess 1 in 3 people that you meet will talk about The Crown. Have you said all you want to say about American TV?
I think so, Julian. Yes.
Okay, because I don't watch it, and the reason I don't watch television in America is that it is unwatchable. And it's unwatchable because the adverts just represent a huge proportion of the total output. So essentially in the US, we now have 18 minutes of adverts per hour. And that is a very distracting. Although the quality of the programs are high, you watch TV for 4 minutes and then you've got 2 minutes of adverts. And they don't delineate between the program and the advert, which is really annoying. And then you get annoyed by the adverts, so you search through the other 100 or 200 or 300 or 400 channels, and most things are adverts because they're in their advert breaks. And then by the time you go back to your program, you catch the last 5 seconds of the program, it goes to an advert again. So I just find that whole experience of watching television in America just completely unwatchable. Have you tried that in a motel room or whatever?
I have, and you're right. And in fact, if you're really clever, you can flick through televisions and see almost different episodes as the program you're watching.
Right, yes.
So I've done that. But when I'm going to make the case, and you'll remember, Julie, when we had the sum total of 4 television channels in the UK.
Right.
So
I remember 3.
Yeah, we've now got hundreds of them. But I sense there's quite a big change taking place in that people aren't watching live TV.
Right.
They're watching Netflix, Amazon Prime or whatever. And of course, you can scroll through the adverts on that. It's less of a problem in the UK because people can avoid the adverts.
And in America, a number of years ago, Disruptors brought in some technology which allowed you to record and then skip through the adverts. And then the TV channels, tried to sue those people, yeah. I think almost always unsuccessfully. Clearly, there are many people who think like me that they just can't bear 18 minutes of adverts per... And I think ITV is something like 7 minutes per hour. Right? 18 is a lot more. And the other thing I don't like about American TV is a very specific one, the infomercial. Have you come across this? An hour-long TV advert?
No, I haven't, Julie. Tell me about it.
There are channels which are entirely adverts. There's no sort of independent programming element, but they give an hour across to somebody who's selling a CD to talk about their CD, imploring you to buy their CD or buy their beauty products or whatever, dietary supplements, that type of thing. And that is within the first 20 seconds, you've got the gist of what it is they're selling. And then it's 59.5 minutes of padding. But next time you're in the States, go to one of their infomercial channels and see them desperately trying, like QVC style.
Well, I was going to say, is that the equivalent of shopping channels, QVC?
Yeah, but it's a whole hour.
Okay.
But
QVC is 24 hours, 7 days a week, just selling things to you.
Yeah, but they're at least riffing off each other and taking calls from Mavis from Cincinnati. 60 minutes of content about why you should buy a CD of some... I mean, who buys a CD now? Oh, you got lots of CDs.
Yeah. Bought a long time ago, Julie.
Yeah, but who but they're trying to flog these CDs of old country singers or whatever. So American TV, are you going to rate this?
I'm going to rate it. I'm going to have to go straight down the middle and give it a 2.5.
Hold on. Can we give 0 ratings? I thought the rating scale went from 1 to 5.
Yes.
Which is straight down the middle would be a 3.
No, it'd be 2.5, Julian.
No, it wouldn't, because you don't use the 0. 1, 5.
No, we could
4,
use
2, and round the middle is 3.
Okay, Julian, being pedantic here. Let's go with a 3, in that I think American TV has some very good features. I think it has some very bad features. Is it overall a positive pervading influence? I'm going to go down the middle and say, I think in most things it is.
Okay, 3. I'm going for a 1. It's unwatchable.
Thank you, Julian.
So, Michael, Yellowstone National Park. Would you like to tell the listeners what it is, where it is, what you can do there?
Well, let me say, first of all, Julian, it's my favourite national park. I've been there twice. And I'm going to tell the visitors it's basically a big volcano. You're sitting in a volcanic basin. Indeed, the second time I
went... When you say big, though, you're talking really big.
2.2 million acres worth of bigness. And when the second time I went there, I was in the middle of reading Bill Bison's book about the sort of history of everything. It hasn't explored or exploded for something like 640,000 years, but it could do it any moment.
Right.
So...
I think there are films which are based on that concept.
Yes, there certainly are.
But I think the reality is, if that super volcano did explode, probably would be close to curtains for the human species.
Yeah, well, it was curtains for the dinosaurs, wasn't it?
Right.
So that's the last time it exploded.
Right.
It's big. If I want to position it, it's to the north of America. It's in Wyoming, mainly.
Well, in Montana.
Montana. So it takes you a while to get there. A couple of days' drive from Denver, would you say, Julian?
For people who are not mad, a couple of days. But there are lots of places you can go on the way. There are fantastic national parks, Tetons and so forth, which I'm going
to refer to.
Okay.
And so what do you get for your money? Well, you get... I'm going to say geezers or geysers, Julian.
Well...
Geezers if you're the States.
Geezers if you're the States.
And are we going to say bison or basin?
Let's call the whole thing off. Now we'll say bison. Don't say buffalo.
You get bison. You get waterfalls. Fantastic visage. So you can see for miles. So absolutely stunning natural scenery. Great wildlife. Not to mention the bears. Grizzly bears. Julian, have you seen one up close?
Just outside Yellowstone, there is a zoo, I guess, for want of a better word, where they have both black and grizzly bears. And I was a little bit further away than I am from you at the moment, but I have seen them up front that close. Outside a zoo environment, I haven't seen a bear. Okay,
well, I saw one in Yellowstone.
Did you?
I was in the safety of a coach, but it was right next to me. It came up to the front of the boat, the boat rather. And in
do you know what to do in the event of a grizzly bear attack?
You don't move.
For a black bear?
You do move.
Yeah. Can you tell the difference between a grizzly bear and a black bear?
Something to do with the eyes.
Something to do, and the back of the neck. It's not the colour. Yeah. People think grizzly bears are brown because they're also called brown bears, and black bears are black. But black bears have a variety of different colours, including brown. Yeah. So
I'm going slightly off piece, Julian. When I was at Yosemite, one walked across my path. Very good. So wildlife, and of course, if you want to see elk as well, lots of elk in Yellowstone. So great place to go. I'm going to make reference though to some of the hotels as well.
Okay.
We went in via Cody. The Cody Gate, and before that we stayed at the Irma Hotel in Cody, Wild Bill Hickok's hotel.
So perhaps we ought to explain what Cody is then to the listener. So Cody is a town which has been preserved really as an example of an old Western town. And it has a very big museum devoted to Buffalo Bills.
Buffalo Bill,
Yeah. They have all sorts of entertainment where, people shoot each other in reenactions of Western type stuff. But Cody is like a day's drive from Yellowstone, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a good day's drive. It's not. It's the middle of Wyoming, isn't it? But it's a long drive to Yellowstone. Just guessing here, 6-7 hours.
I don't think it's as long as that.
Is it? Okay.
No,
If only there was modern technology would enable us to see immediately how long
But definitely, I invite you to go to Cody. I think it's a great starting point for a trip. Well, and what you have to appreciate, driving through the park itself, when we say a park, it's a very big place. So it can take you almost a day to get from one place to the other. So, if you want to go and see the geysers at Old Faithful, Old Faithful Inn, and you want to go and see Mammoth Springs, that's a good day's drive between the two.
Right.
Yeah. So recognising that you do need to allow lots of time. You're going to say, Julian, that it's also very busy at certain times.
I will go on to say that. Have you got anything else you want to say about Yellowstone? Why should people go there? What's the compelling reason that they should go there?
The scenery and the wildlife. It's like one of those things it has to be on your bucket list. Unless you've been and seen it, it is something fairly unique, I think.
Western US scenery is phenomenal. It's like nothing anywhere else on the earth. So I would always recommend to people that they go to large swathes of the West. And I would agree with you that Yellowstone scenery is phenomenal. So Yellowstone is a national park. I think actually might even be the first national park.
It was the first national park, opened in 1872, Julian. And what is more, going to one of my favourite topics, of course its popularity stems from the Western Pacific Railroad arriving at Livingston.
Right.
That's what was the first time tourists got into the park.
A lot of the railways were built in order to get to tourist destinations. When Americans got richer, they wanted to see more of their country, and they did that by railroad. To be a national park, you have to have something which is unique and applies only to that national park. So there are 62 national parks. They are all unique in their own ways. And with Yellowstone being the first one, obviously that indicates that it is something special. As they were exploring America, they came across this place, and even amongst all the wonders, this was the place they said, well, this has to be a national park. I agree with you, it is tremendous. You didn't talk about the colourful pools,
no.
Prismatic hot springs that they have there, full of bacteria and microbes, which cause all these various different colours and this sort of boiling mass of
But
liquid.
I did reference Mammoth Springs, which is the same sort of effect, isn't it? It's water going through them, yes.
You see these springs, they have kind of boardwalks over these springs, and then there are signs everywhere imploring people not to walk off the boardwalks, but you always see some tourist who's decided they're going to ignore those signs, and occasionally, every year or so, they have some tourist who walks off the boardwalk and then just evaporates into the boiling mass, never to be seen again. That's a very impressive sight, and it goes back to your point that fundamentally it's a volcano.
Yeah.
I guess I'm an American citizen, so I'm going to say geysers. The geysers there are phenomenal. There's one called Old Faithful. It's an odd name for it because it isn't that reliable.
No.
I mean, it erupts, round about 20 times a day, on average, every 74 minutes. But it ranges between 60 and 110 minutes.
I think the Old Faithful came because it initially did what it does. It spewed hot water into the atmosphere every 60 minutes. I think that's where it came. But over time, as you rightly say, it seems now to be between 75 and 90 minutes, and increasingly irregular in its times.
And how long it erupts for is regular, and it varies in height between 100 and 180 feet, so a long way up in the air. And it gushes between 4,000 and 8,000 gallons of water, of scalding water. So that is a great sight. There are a couple of hotels near there. There's the Old Faithful Inn, and then there's I can't remember the name of it. There's the newer inn, which is close to it. So there are spectacular, and there's the animals, and there's countryside. But my controversial viewpoint, and when I told my wife what my controversial viewpoint was, she said, "You can't say this."
It's our podcast.
I am going to say it, yeah. I would suggest that people do not go to Yellowstone if they are travelling to the US in the summer months. It is extraordinary. There are too many people there. The traffic jams are too long. You can't kid yourself that you're in the wilderness when there are so many people around you and you're embroiled in a 3-hour traffic jam. My advice is that if you're travelling in the summer months in the US, that you do not go to Yellowstone, that you choose one of the other 61 national parks instead. You go to North Cascades National Park, which hardly anyone goes to, or Crater Lake in Oregon. You go to something else, they will be also unique, but they will be less visited. That is my advice. However, if you're traveling outside those times, if you're traveling in, shoulder or the winter, I would say it's a splendid place. I plan to go to Yellowstone December or January at some point. You'll snowmobiled into the area around the Old Faithful because they've got all these geysers erupting. It's the only area in the park which doesn't have some snow. So all of the animals are attracted to that area because there's non-frozen water they can drink, and it's a fabulous place. And not only do you get the excitement, the adventure of traveling 30 miles on a snowmobile, but you also get all the beautiful animals and the geysers as well. So I rate it very highly if you go in the winter, but in the summer, it's just not worth it. There are other places you can go to which are better.
Okay, I was going to give a name check to a couple of hotels. You've mentioned Old Faithful, and I've mentioned them in the Lake Yellowstone Hotel is very good.
Oh, is it?
Beautiful. And if you're going to travel out of the park, going via the Great Tetons, Jackson Lake Lodge is also very good.
Okay.
Beautiful views. So, so I take the point you make around, I don't know, no place is pleasant when you've got lots and lots of fellow tourists, but I still think the overall experience probably offsets the downside of the traffic.
My argument is you don't have a downside. You go somewhere like North Cascades National Park. It is a tremendous place. There's no one there. You have a wonderful time.
But no geysers or geysers.
There is a lake. To get to the park, you've got to travel 4 hours up a lake. That's a great start for it. So.
And I know in a future episodes...
Can I break the habit of 8 episodes and actually give people some useful advice?
Yes.
Okay, so my useful advice, national park accommodation. So is books up 365 days in advance. So no, nowadays they don't build accommodation in national parks, but in the old days they built some of these wonderful lodges in the early 20th century mostly. And these properties book up 365 days a year, and they usually book up within minutes. My advice is that if you're planning to go in summer months in national parks, you'll find when you try and book up, it'll be everything booked. But my advice is that you phone every day until you happen to phone at the time just after someone else has cancelled their accommodation. That's my advice to listeners. If you want to, and you do want to be in national park accommodation, if you're in accommodation outside the national park, especially Yellowstone, if it's really busy traffic, be 3-hour commute in and out every day, which is not what people want on their vacation. So persevere, phone them every day, and eventually you will find a day when they accommodation which is free.
There was one other piece of advice I have to give Julian, because, and I won't name the lodge because I think that's slightly unfair, but I'm taking my beloved there. I did purchase the romantic package.
Did you? That is always... I can't believe that you...
Now let me say also, to reinforce what you've said...
They're really gullible, you must. What had you done wrong?
Well, so I have to point out that you're right, these are Victorian buildings. So,
right.
So first of all, there was no ensuite bathroom.
No.
My wife did not take kindly to that. In her words... She does not do roughy-dufty.
Right.
So, and then secondly, the romantic package seemed to be a cellophane-covered dish of strawberries and ice cream and a cheap bottle of American sparkling wine.
Right.
We weren't impressed with the romantic package.
No.
And in fact, as penance, and my wife made me phone every other hotel we were staying at to make sure the bathroom was en suite. After doing it a couple of times, the level of disbelief when I was speaking to the Four Seasons in Denver had to be seen to believe that you have got an en suite bathroom.
It is incredibly rare not to get that. You get that in some bed and breakfasts, and you do get it in some of the older national park hotels. So they're expensive, actually, these national park hotels. $400 is around about the price you're going to pay, but it's worth it for being in the park rather than having to drive in every day.
So book early, but not the romantic package. So, Julian, up next is our continuing series on US education. And this time you're going to focus on icons. And what do we mean by icons? We're talking about the big yellow buses and proms and things. So, Julian, over to you.
We have all seen many movies and TV shows that feature American schools. In this episode, we will be focusing on the icons of the American public school system. While some of these features have started to filter over to the UK school system, these icons are inherently American. Again, my daughters will provide the observations on the US school experience. The iconic yellow school bus is a twice-daily experience for most students, as all students are entitled to this free service. The bus picks students up every morning from their home and returns them in the evening. Schedules are staggered to achieve this. Elementary children are collected first from just before 7 a.m, high schoolers just before 8 a.m, and students from junior high school, also called middle school, are collected just before 9 a.m. States have strict laws on driving near school buses. If a school bus is stopped to pick up or let out school children, other drivers must not pass. Daughter number 1 recalls her first day on the school bus.
Yeah, I remember my first day on the school bus like it was yesterday. And in fact, I wrote my college admissions essay on my first day in the United States on the school bus. The bus driver is tasked with driving the bus and also maintaining the behavioural standards that are needed to drive a bus all by themselves. So the kids are all just making a lot of noise, being rambunctious, jumping over seats, being terribly behaved, and the poor bus driver would just be able to yell at them, but they also had to keep their eyes on the road and keep focused, which is another big, I think, difficulty of driving a school bus. It's not a pleasant job, I can't imagine.
You said you wrote your essay on the school bus for college. So what was so special about that first day on the school bus, apart from the rambunctious behaviour of the people on the bus?
I think it was just very overwhelming. Everyone was significantly older than me, because I was a year younger than everyone, which made a big difference. So that was the first time I saw a person who was my age with a beard. That was a little bit worrying to me, considering I hadn't even started shaving my legs. But here was a boy sitting next to me with a full-grown beard. And I think that just the overwhelming kind of smells that everything you would think about in a boys' locker room,
right,
you could find on that bus.
Okay. Did you enjoy the school bus experience?
No, I hated my school bus experience. Who would like going into there's a hierarchy on the bus.
How does the hierarchy work?
So the youngest sit at the front, as closest to the bus driver. That middle grade sit at the middle of the bus. And then if you're the oldest ones, you sit at the very back of the bus. And the popular people sit on the back bench at the back of the bus.
Okay. Did you ever sit on the back bench?
No.
I asked daughter number 2 whether she had ever sat in the last row of the bus.
It was a really big deal to sit in the last row of the back of the bus. Mm-hmm. I went to the bus on the first day of school, and my friend that I had made that day took me right to the back, and I sat in the very back seat, and I got a bunch of really dirty looks from people that had been at that elementary school for 5 years and had waited their turn to sit at the back of the bus. And yet I had just waltzed in and sat at the back of the bus.
But no doubt the people who were driving the bus were extremely well-trained drivers.
No. Gosh. I remember we had a bus driver who I will name because there's plenty of people with this name. Miss Elaine was my 8th grade bus driver. If there was a curb that she could possibly hit, she would drive over it.
Well, so, on purpose?
Yeah,
or just...
I don't know. I mean, we would I didn't throw myself over the seats of the bus, but to make a point, oftentimes when she hit a curb, everyone would jump over to the seat in front of them to just portray how poor her driving was.
Okay. Sounds like great fun, actually. I mean, I really wish I'd been there.
There's something inherently uncool about riding the school bus, though.
Yes.
Because the cool kids' parents, if you're really cool, your parents drive you to school.
Okay. Of course, and we mentioned this in a previous episode of An American Journey, when you're 16, everyone drives themselves to school.
Exactly. You're a real loser if you're still riding the school bus at 16.
Right. And of course, there will be many losers because their parents aren't necessarily rich enough to buy them a car.
In the school district I went to, that was not really the case because all the homes are single-family homes with an average price of, $350,000.
I asked daughter number 2 to describe the school bus.
I only took the school bus in middle school and elementary school. By the time I hit high school, I was lucky enough to have a boyfriend that would take me, but...
and then you had your own car.
And then I had my own car, but the school bus, it used to have no air conditioning.
Mm-hmm. And in the south, where we lived, which was Atlanta, that it's hot, isn't it? I mean,
it was so hot.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the buses would be really crowded, so we would sit 3 people to a seat.
Mm-hmm.
And those seats do only fit 2 people. Mm-hmm. And some people would sit on the floor, no seat belts. It was sort of a little Wild West type of thing.
Where did the bus pick you up from?
The bus picked me up from right outside our house, but that is also...
And it took you right to the school?
Yes, right to the school. But a lot of the kids that lived in, neighborhoods, they would walk to a bus stop, and some of them were pretty far away. And it was a pretty common thing for kids to miss the bus, but I think I missed the bus, twice, because all I had to do was walk outside, and it was right there.
As daughter number 2 alluded earlier, when students receive their driving licenses, they prefer to drive to school themselves. With pretty much all juniors and seniors driving to school, this means that most school car parks, or parking lots, are enormous. It also concentrates many bad, inexperienced drivers in one place. I asked daughter number 1 how many students were at her high school.
It was probably one of the bigger in the state of Georgia. When I started, it was about 2,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
When I think my sister graduated, it was closer to 2,500 people.
But there are some bigger ones, aren't there, in the same district? I think this one was almost 4,000 now.
Yes.
And how does that compare to the average comprehensive school in the UK?
It's a lot bigger.
Yeah, so what would be about 1,000 in a large
But
UK.
you've also, it's 1,000 between the ages of 11 to 18 versus only 4 years having 2,500 students is very large.
In the UK, over 90% of schools insist on a school uniform. Most head teachers believe that uniforms reduce bullying and other bad behaviour. They also highlight less any disparity in parental income. 2/3 of British parents agree, but some rail against the average cost of these uniforms, some $350 per year. In the US, uniforms are typically reserved for either private schools or schools in gang areas. In 90% of high schools, you can more or less wear what you want, subject to decency standards. Here is daughter number 2, talking about dress code in US schools.
We didn't have an actual uniform type blazer situation. We could pretty much wear what you wanted. Well, okay. In middle school, no, you couldn't wear what you wanted. You couldn't wear those typical Nike shorts that everybody wears because those were too revealing. You couldn't wear spaghetti straps. You couldn't wear strapless tops. You couldn't show too much cleavage.
Other than that, you could wear anything you wanted. There was no uniform. You didn't have to wear the same colour. No ties.
No,
boaters.
No, none of that. But I mean, obviously,
there were sort of rules for decency.
Saying anything you wanted is just not true at all. Because I think it inhibited anybody in middle school from dressing like themselves or having any sense of personal style. Because everybody just ended up wearing jeans and a sweatshirt because that was the only thing that you were guaranteed to be able to wear without somebody telling you to change.
Well, I seem to remember that most of the time you went to school with slippers and a dressing gown.
Yes.
Well, that's true, isn't it?
Yes. That is true. Sometimes I would bring a box of cereal too, but I didn't care.
As you might expect by now, daughter number 1 has a slightly different perspective.
I thought it was going to be so cool to wear my own clothes because in the US public or state school system, everyone gets to wear what they want to wear, or at least that's what television told me to believe. I was distraught to find out that actually there are quite a few rules related with uniform, and also I hated having to get up every morning and pick out something that I thought that people would want to see me in.
Okay. So you would actually prefer to wear a school uniform, as in the UK system, than choose something which you wanted to wear. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but that probably goes with me calling the children rambunctious. So
Yeah.
it was a waste of my time in the day to have to think about what I was going to wear. And it was very difficult to do it with the constraints of the rules. So shorts had to be no more than 3 inches above the knee, and skirts the same length. No leggings of any kind unless you were wearing a dress.
Well, I'm certain that I saw daughter number 2 wearing much shorter shorts than that on a regular basis.
They relaxed the rules by the time she got there. But in my first few years, just because of the administration at the time, they were pretty strict.
Some UK schools experiment with having no uniforms from time to time, believing that it will reduce the time teachers spend on policing the uniform code. However, they often find themselves spending as much time policing decency standards in a non-uniform situation. In the US, it is the school administrators rather than the teachers who deal with discipline. We will explore this topic further in a later episode. Therefore, the extent to which they police decency standards depends on each administrator. And how often were these rules enforced?
In middle school, all the time. All the time. If the teacher saw you and she didn't think it was appropriate, she would send you to the office, and then they would see if they would have anything in, like, the gym that you could wear. Or if not, they would make your mom or dad bring you something, or they would just send you home. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was so stupid, because you're just wasting your time. Once you got to high school, that kind of stuff all went away. I pretty much wore exactly what I wanted to. Nobody ever really told me what to wear.
Another feature of schools in American TV shows is the school locker. I asked daughter number 2 if they were a big thing.
It was a huge thing. We didn't have them in elementary school because you stayed in one classroom for pretty much the entire day. In middle school, where we finally started moving from class to class, we did have lockers, and that was like the coolest thing ever. Everybody was so excited to have a locker, but it wasn't those like long lockers that you see in the movies. It was the ones where there's one locker on the top and then one locker on the bottom. So everybody was dying to have a top locker, because having somebody drop their stuff on you, trying to get their stuff out of the top locker while you're on the ground, was not a fun experience.
Well, we see in the movies that we see lots of fights which happen, around the locker area. Is that what happened in practice?
In middle school, no. But, I mean, in high school there were fights, but the fights sort of happened in the cafeteria and with girls that had ankle bracelets from their probation officer. So, it wasn't the typical jock pushing the nerd into the locker. That I've never seen that happen. I honestly don't think that's ever happened. Right. But there were fights.
But in general, we're going to talk about discipline later, but in general, there aren't fights because they are extremely heavily punished. Is that right?
You're going to get suspended if you get in a fight, but I guess some people didn't care. Right. Obviously, it tore away from the people, like the jocks and the people that were on football team and baseball teams, because they know if they got in a fight, they wouldn't be able to play or practice. Right. And that was a big deal for them. But for the kids that weren't active in school, I mean, they didn't care. They didn't want to be there anyways.
Well, of course, British pupils have cafeterias in their schools. American high school cafeterias seem mysterious from TV shows. Here I am talking to daughter number 1 about them. I think British people would have seen on American TV shows and movies scenes in the US school cafeteria. Tell me what the US cafeteria is like.
I'm going to make an assumption that maybe your audience may have seen at least one clip from the cafeteria in High School Musical.
Right.
It is very similar. There was no singing or
Michael
dancing.
Probably has never heard of High School Musical, but I agree that most of the listeners will have heard and seen High School
And if you
Musical.
haven't, just search online High School Musical cafeteria, and that'll give you a good idea of tables that are around, big fixed stools with big round tables, big long tables like in a banquet hall, but also with stools attached. And then a lunch line of various different options that you can purchase at school.
Were there any rules in the cafeteria?
There were a lot of hierarchy rules, yeah. Okay. It was unwritten rules that weren't necessarily... they were definitely not enforced by administration, but they were enforced by the student body and things that you would just learn by.
So give me an example of these.
So the freshmen had a designated group area that they were allowed to sit. And if you maybe had a friend that was slightly older or you were dating an older person, you could break those barriers. Okay. But you were not allowed to come uninvited. This is unwritten, of course. Yeah. Into areas with sophomores or juniors or especially not seniors.
Daughter number 2 has a similar take to her sister, but a different way of describing it.
Our cafeteria, it was just one huge room. The food was awful. A lot of people got food from the actual cafeteria, but I brought lunch only because it was the same stuff every day and it got pretty gross. And you started realizing just how gross it all was. But
you mean gross, you mean unhealthy.
Yeah, and undercooked. There were a lot of flaws in our cafeteria, but...
And what were the do's and don'ts then?
There was one section that was purely juniors and seniors, so if you were an underclassman, meaning a freshman or a sophomore, you wouldn't go over there unless you had an older sister or an older brother. You wouldn't go over there because everybody would look at you. And they had 2 microwaves, one at the underclassmen section of the cafeteria and one at the upper section class. Our microwave broke a lot, so you would have little freshmen that are 5 foot boys that would be traveling over to the other side of the cafeteria to use the microwave, and it was just kind of comical. I mean, nothing. You would just get a few weird stares, but if your freshman friend group tried to go and sit at somebody's table on the other side, I mean, somebody's going to tell you to get up.
One feature of the US school British listeners may not be familiar with is the Pledge of Allegiance. I asked daughter number 2 what the Pledge of Allegiance was.
The Pledge of Allegiance is, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And so, when would you say that?
From elementary school to the last day of high school, every single morning. We would have morning announcements and it would come over and they would say, please stand. And then everybody recites it in unison, kind of like a cult.
And is it a good thing?
In my opinion, it makes absolutely no difference whether you say it or not. My math teacher, freshman year of high school, and she was my first period, so we would start every day with her and do the Pledge of Allegiance with her every day. And there was one girl in our class that stopped standing or saying it. And she obviously had her own personal reasons for it. Our teacher got extremely upset at her one day and was like, I don't care whatever you think about this country, but you're going to stand up and you're going to say it. From then on, I made a point to not stand nor say it because I don't know why she would say that. It's not a requirement. You don't have to say it, nor do you have to stand. She was just one of those people that thought that it was disrespectful, which is fine. I stopped saying it after that. In my math class, senior year, which was also my first period, nobody said it nor stood up.
Right.
Our teacher tried to make everybody stop talking. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but everybody just stopped saying it.
I did speak to someone the other day and they were astonished that in high school they were still saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Because in California, where they were, it's something which only happens in elementary and junior high. Yeah.
There is no similar experience in the UK school system, except perhaps school assembly, where the whole school gathers together to worship, or perhaps listen to a senior teacher talk about the dangers of taking drugs. We've all seen coming-of-age movies where the prom features heavily. In the last decade or so, these proms are also becoming a feature in UK schools. I asked daughter number 2 how many proms she had attended.
There's only prom for juniors and seniors, but I went my sophomore year too because I had an older boyfriend at the time. I didn't end up going to my senior one because of COVID restrictions. They canceled it.
Tell the listeners what prom is.
Prom is one of the most overhyped events of the year, I would say. 99% of prom is extremely stressful, especially if you're the person planning it, because you have to organize everybody, where to take pictures, getting a dress is extremely complicated for some reason, makeup, hair, shoes. I mean, for a girl, it's a lot, but for a boy, I guess it's not a big deal whatsoever, and they just show up. The 2 times that I went to prom, the first time when my group got there, I went with a group of about 20 people, so like 10 couples. We walked in and we stayed there for 20 minutes, I would like to say. And then we got back on the bus and then we went to the after party. Pretty much everything that people tell you about prom, the actual prom part was not that fun. But the after party was fun.
And that's the unofficial bit, which is not run by the school.
Yes.
Which is held usually at somebody's parents or a
lake house, yeah.
Lake house, yeah. So what, you have your photos done in
yes.
groups?
Lots of photos.
You go for a meal?
Yes.
You get your limousine?
Yes, or a party bus with a stripper pole. I mean, it was fun.
That does sound very high class.
Yeah, it was.
You found that prom was a bit overhyped.
Yes, but I guess I also didn't really attempt to appreciate it as much as I should have, because I do know people that went to prom and danced for 2 hours, but it was also the type of thing, because obviously when you're 17, kids in America like to drink, so they would all go to prom drinking and being drunk, but then you would have every administrator looking at you, and if you looked like you were drunk, they could still get you in trouble. So I think the reason why we didn't stay very long was because nobody wanted to get suspended.
Okay. And I thought you couldn't drink until you were 21 in the US.
That's correct.
There has been massive inflation on proms. Today, the average parent spends over $1,000 on the prom experience. Some high-end after-prom parties feature celebrities hired for the evening. The final rite of passage at high school is the graduation ceremony. Here is daughter number 2 talking about hers.
I think the graduation is extremely important to most people, but I think it's a lot more important to people's families than it is to the actual student graduating. Especially with a school like I went to, there was like a 99% graduation rate. It was kind of an expectation to graduate, not an accomplishment. But the parents still love to go. Normal graduation is about 3 hours long. And it was pretty brutal if you were just sitting there.
Thousands?
Everybody. I mean, everybody. Everybody's family. Everybody's extended family, if they could come. Would you like me to talk about my personal graduation?
Yeah, as you're the one who's done it, so I've not done it.
Obviously, we had to have our graduation a little late because of COVID restrictions. We had it outside, which isn't usually typical. It's usually on a college campus in one of their auditoriums. Everybody was 6 feet apart, and we all got to walk along the stage and do everything. People still had their speeches. The valedictorian speaks. And
the valedictorian is what?
The person in the graduating class with the highest GPA.
Okay, because one of the things they do at the US is they rank every student according to their grade point average.
Yes, it's called a class rank.
Class rank. So if there were 500 in your year, which is what your year was, there was number 1 to number 500. So number 1 is the valedictorian, number 2 is the saladictorian, and then what number were you?
22.
That's decent. Did you enjoy the graduation experience?
Yes, actually, I'm extremely glad I went. I know a lot of my friends didn't go because they were just too lazy, but I think that it was the right thing to do. and I have a really nice video of me graduating.
Some of the students, they took the knee, didn't they, for Black Lives Matters?
Yes, I was included.
Yeah, so what was that then?
That was just to stand in solidarity with everything that was happening, because of course that was at the time in June and July with all of the protests everywhere in Minnesota and everywhere, literally everywhere, not even just in the US, everywhere. But I think about 10% of my class took a knee, which was honestly much more than I was expecting. But I feel like some of their parents also told them that they would be extremely upset if they did take a knee. So I do know some people that were discouraged out of doing it because of their family.
I enjoyed daughter number 2's graduation. Here is an excerpt of my observations from the audiobook of High, Wide and Handsome. The whole audiobook is available on Audible, iTunes and Amazon. 2 weeks after our road trip, daughter number 2 finally attended her high school graduation. It was held 2 months late, but in person on a football field rather than online, which her classmates had feared. COVID was prevalent in the community at that time, but the school administrators did an excellent job creating a fully socially distant event. The stadium field sported 1,000 seats for the seniors, all at least 6 feet from each other. 4,000 seats in the stands were marked so that family groups could attend substantially apart from any other. Everybody wore a mask. There was an accidental British theme to the whole event. The graduates entered the arena to an extended version of Algar's Land of Hope and Glory, the British patriotic anthem. They exited to Walton's Crown Imperial initially, and then finally to the 1985 hit Walking on Sunshine by British band and later Eurovision winners Katrina and the Waves. It was raining. As with every American event, it featured the singing of the American national anthem. Everyone would stand for the Star-Spangled Banner with their right hand or cap over their heart in normal times. However, the Black Lives Matter movement had started to change the cultural landscape of the USA. I noticed that about 1 in 6 students, but conspicuously none of the parents, took the knee or remained seated during the rendition. This defiant act would have been unthinkable 3 months previously. Of course, daughter number 2 was one of the defiant ones who defended their right to protest peacefully as part of the First Amendment. Many speeches were orated. One of the Board of Education elected officials gave an address, a version of which presumably he had been providing for more than a decade. We knew him reasonably well, as he seemed to go to every school event in his 15-school constituency. He was obviously committed to the well-being of children, but was highly conservative in his views and attitudes. His speech seemed out of touch with many from Generation Z on the field. He proclaimed that the graduates were lucky to be born into the greatest country on earth that there had ever been. This viewpoint was pretty standard fare, and we had heard this sentiment 100 times. However, it now seemed a little out of place in a humble country struggling to come to terms with past injustices. One by one, each student then marched on stage to collect their graduation scroll. We had been asked not to shout out as our loved ones received their award, so that parents of the following graduate did not miss their child's name being announced. It was easy for us Brits to adhere to this rule. However, Americans just can't help themselves shouting out their good wishes, whether it's a general cheer, a whooping noise, or the ever-annoying, "In the hole!" It's just part of what they do. The whole process of graduating every student took a long time. Americans do these events exceptionally well. It provided a fitting moment for daughter number 2 to celebrate her passing from school to university and from adolescence to adulthood.
That concludes this episode of An American Journey. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, we love getting feedback from our listeners. And this week I want to, first of all, highlight Wendy McIntyre Hogan, who says it was a great episode. In particular, having experienced the same thing, their boys losing their UK accent. So thank you, Julian, for that. Mike, I think it's Aiton, he really liked this comparison we're making on education. Apparently, Julian, your daughters make a good, I'm going to say, he says counterpoint, I say counterfoil. I like the way they politely put you down on occasion. That's very good. Greg McPhee says he's not only enjoying...
I think it might be McAfee.
Said he not only enjoys the podcast, but he enjoyed your book. So that gives you a chance yet again, Julian, to plug that bestseller of yours, which is...
High, Wide and Handsome, An American Journey.
And of course, the inspiration for this podcast.
And on next time's episode, we're going to cover why are there no workers in the US and the UK?
Or where have all the workers gone?
We're going to help Michael plan his next US trip. And we're going to continue our series on education, this time focusing on cliques in high school.
So until next time, thank you everybody for listening.
Is that more technology, Mike?
That's more technology. Somebody at the front door.
Do you not know who is at the front door?
No.
Can you not see it?
I can't see it. I've got my phone.
Oh, okay. Well, it could be important.
Well, should I go then?
No. Let's continue. Let's just wait until
Jeremy comes down.
Right. Now, where were we?
Especially
They're being rambunctious.
Yeah.
What's that when it's at home? I know what rambunctious means. It's just it's an odd.
Yeah.
Disorderly.
They were rambunctious. Would you rather I say disorderly?
Carry on.
They were being rambunctious and jumping over seats and just, in general, just...
How big are high schools then in the US? How big was your high school?
Ooh.
Do you want to know the answer? 2,000
Sure.
students.
Oh, you mean people. I thought
Yeah.
you were looking for square feet.
Yeah, no, how many people?
But I also dressed like a boy for the last 3 years of high school. So...
Well, they wear slippers and dressing gowns, do they?
No, but I was wearing sweatpants and looking like a garbage disposal man, so it wasn't really... didn't really apply to me. But, I mean, there were girls that would wear extremely crop tops, and nobody was going to say anything. Okay. Especially since I started having male teachers, which no male teacher is going to say that it's too inappropriate, because by 17 or 18, you're just going to tell them, well, why were you looking? So
they, yeah. Okay. And some